Japanese games dominated the original PlayStation in the early stages of the PlayStation 2, they have of late improved the graphics, but with few exceptions have stubbornly held to gameplay design that is firmly rooted in the past. The games have not made any strides in innovative gameplay, feeding a content Japanese audience the same formula, as evident in Lost Odyssey and Devil May Cry 4. With innovative titles such as Assassin's Creed, BioShock, and Portal available to American audiences, will Japan's resistance to experiment be tolerated in the West? Joining us today from San Francisco, former editorial director of GameSpot.com and current blogger, Jeff Gerstmann. Also joining us today from San Francisco, former editor-in-chief of ShackNews.com, gaming journalist Chris Remo. Welcome to our show, guys. Thanks so much for joining us.
Anytime.
So, Jeff, this is all because we looked at Devil May Cry 4 and Lost Odyssey this week, and while the games are visually very impressive, they seem to be mired in a lot of gameplay that feels generations old. What do you think is behind this impetus in Japan to do that?
Well, I think that, these are sequels or games that are built by people that have histories in a specific genre. So they're kind of just drawing on what's worked for them in the past. And, it seems like most of that is still working pretty well for most of them, but they might not be attracting new players at this point, just fans of those specific series or genres.
I think that's a very good point. And Chris, when you look at these very innovative and original games like BioShock, Assassin's Creed, and Mass Effect that have sold over 1 million copies already, I mean, are we seeing it harder for these more traditional Japanese games to really find an audience in the new marketplace?
Yeah, I think we've seen from a lot of Japanese publishers actually say the Japanese market isn't what it once was. Let's look to the Western market, both in terms of target and maybe, emulation a little bit. What can we do to try to reach those players, to try to get across the pond? We've seen a lot of Japanese publishers say this for the first time. Not just think of the Japanese market, then the global market, but let's think of the global market first. And I think that when you talk to Japanese designers, a lot of times the games they cite as being influential are some of these Western games that we don't traditionally think of as being a big part of the Japanese market. So I think going forward, we might actually see more of that influence in Japanese titles. I mean, some like No More Heroes, for example, that was specifically said to be tailored for the Western market from the beginning.
And Jeff, obviously you became rather infamous for your review of Twilight Princess, but you made a very good point in it. It is very much the same style of game that you can expect in many of the 3D Zelda games. This seems to be a tradition for Nintendo. Obviously, it is working very well for them, but do you even see for Nintendo they may need to start innovating?
I think everyone could stand to start innovating. I mean, this is something you see in Japanese games, but it's something you kind of see across the board right now, just in terms of developers being stuck in the middle. If they change too much, they risk alienating their existing fan base. If they don't change enough, they run the risk of putting out something that people are going to brand or rehash. So finding that middle ground is tricky for developers around the world, not just the ones in Japan.
Now, Chris, you brought up such a nice point about Suda51's No More Heroes, which really is getting wonderful reception here in the States and did terribly when it went is Japan. And in addition to that, he said that he's going to start developing for the 360, obviously a far more Western console out there. Do you think there are other developers that might have to go that route, or do you think that they're really going to be making, Dynasty Warriors $8 billion, in the next 5 years?
Right. Well, it's funny you bring up the Xbox 360. In addition to going for that global market, a lot of Japanese publishers for the first time are saying we need to pursue multi-platform development. That's something we traditionally just don't see from Japanese developers. We see them working exclusively on one console. And I think along with that move to a broader market, to multiple platforms per game, I think right now we're seeing a bit of conservatism on the design side as they're trying to figure out how to mitigate that risk and deal with that new type of design pipeline. But I think on the other side of the coin, when Japanese developers do develop for a system like the Xbox 360, it's going to make them much more conscious of what they need to do to really attract the audience that is associated with that console. And that when you're trying to adapt to a new situation and attract new customers, inevitably you're going to end up having to innovate or come up with new concepts.
Well, guys, thank you so much. Hopefully this will lead us to maybe Lost Odyssey 2 and it'll be real-time combat. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind staying there for 1 second, we're going to have a little chat with you. Obviously, sure. You became one of the most well-known names on the internet at the end of last year with your departure from GameSpot.com. Are you in a position you might be able to enlighten us as to what may have been behind those circumstances?
Well, there's really not much that I can say about the circumstances of my departure, unfortunately.
Okay, that I completely understand. There are legal implications for everyone involved with this. But what are you doing now, and how can people sort of enjoy the wisdom of Jeff Gerstmann?
Well, right now I'm just keeping a blog. Nothing ready to announce just yet, but you can go to jeffgerstmann.net and kind of keep up with me, working on a romantic comedy. No, just kind of keeping busy and keeping sharp for when I do get back in there. I'll be ready to go.
All right, well, we can't wait for it. Thanks so much for joining us today.